A 6-year-old girl saves a billionaire's life on a sidewalk. What he does next changes her world forever. Lily Garrison was 6 years old, but anyone watching her walk alone down the crowded Manhattan sidewalk that afternoon might have mistaken her for older. There was a seriousness in her eyes that didn't belong to most children. The heat pressed down from above, the sun turning the concrete beneath her sneakers into a sizzling griddle. She clutched a brown paper pharmacy bag tightly in both hands, her arms wrapped around it like it carried treasure. In a way, it did, medicine for her mother, who had been getting worse over the past few weeks. The city moved around her in its usual blur. Businessmen barked into phones, delivery bikes weaved through traffic, and tourists pointed up at buildings that pierced the sky. But Lily barely noticed. Her eyes were locked ahead, her feet remembering the way home like they'd walked it 100 times, because they had. She had made this trip to the pharmacy more times than a 6-year-old should ever have to. At the intersection of 5th Avenue and 53rd, something unusual caught her attention. She didn't see what happened at first. There was just the noise, a sharp, sudden gasp that swept through the small crowd nearby. Then a loud thud, not like the bang of a car crash or the clatter of metal, but something softer. Heavier. She turned. A tall man had collapsed on the sidewalk. He wore a light blue suit that looked like it cost more than her family made in a year. His tie was loosened, and his shirt slightly rumpled, but it didn't hide the fact that this man was someone important, or at least looked like he was. People around him froze. Some stepped back. One woman let out a quiet scream. A man nearby was already pulling out his phone, not to call for help, but to record. Lily didn't hesitate. Her feet moved before she even thought. She dropped the paper bag beside her and knelt beside the man. His skin was pale. His dark hair was damp with sweat, and his eyes fluttered behind closed lids. "Mister," she asked softly, reaching out and shaking his shoulder. "Are you okay?" He didn't respond. She felt a rush of something rise inside her, a deep, cold fear, but it didn't stop her. She looked around. No one was doing anything. A security guard across the street was talking into a radio, but he wasn't moving toward them. Lily reached into the front pocket of her yellow jumpsuit and pulled out a flip phone, an old one her mom had given her just in case. She pressed the emergency button. The line clicked. "911, what's your emergency?" "There's a man," Lily said, her voice steady, "on the sidewalk on 5th Avenue. He fell. I think he's sick. He's not waking up." The dispatcher began asking questions. Lily answered every one calmly, her voice clear. She gave the address, described what the man looked like, even mentioned his breathing, shallow, but there. She stayed on the line until she heard the distant whine of a siren. When the ambulance pulled up, the EMTs jumped out. One of them glanced at Lily. "Are you the one who called?" She nodded silently. "Good job, sweetheart. You might have just saved his life." As they loaded the man into the ambulance, Lily stood quietly, watching. No one around her spoke. No one thanked her. Most had already moved on. The sidewalk returned to its regular pace as if nothing had happened. But Lily knew something had. Something important. She picked up the paper bag from where she dropped it, brushed off a speck of dirt, and turned toward home. The hallway smelled like dust and old paint, and the fluorescent lights above flickered with a tired hum as Lily climbed the 3 flights of stairs to their apartment. The elevator had been broken for months, and even though her legs ached and the paper bag in her arms felt heavier with every step, she didn't complain. She was used to it. At the top of the stairs, she fished the key out of her pocket, nudged the door open with her shoulder, and stepped inside their small one-bedroom unit. The air inside was stale, still, and far too quiet. "Mom?" she called gently, kicking off her shoes near the door. No answer. She walked toward the bedroom, her sneakers barely making a sound on the scuffed wood floor. When she pushed the door open, her stomach dropped. Her mother, Carol, was lying on the ground next to the bed, her face pale and her breathing shallow. A glass of water had spilled nearby, soaking into the old rug. Without panicking, Lily dropped the paper bag and rushed over. She knelt beside her mother and touched her shoulder. "Mom. It's me. I'm home. Can you hear me?" Carol's eyes fluttered open slowly, and she gave a weak smile, her lips dry. "Hey, baby," she whispered. "You're back." Lily helped her mother sit up, supporting her with one arm while grabbing the blanket off the bed to wrap around her. She moved like someone who had done this many times before. Carefully, she reached for the bottle of pills inside the paper bag, unscrewed the cap, and handed 2 of them to her mother along with a fresh glass of water from the bathroom. Carol took them with trembling hands. She tried to sit up straight, but her body sagged against Lily's. "You always take such good care of me," she murmured. "My little nurse." Lily didn't answer. She just rested her head gently on her mom's shoulder and closed her eyes for a moment. She didn't cry. She never did, not in front of her. Carol had always told her to be brave. And Lily had learned what bravery looked like, not running from danger, not hiding when things got hard, but staying close, even when it was painful. Her mother had once been full of energy and laughter, dancing in the kitchen while pancakes sizzled on Sunday mornings. But ever since the diagnosis, everything had changed. The smiles were fewer, the silences longer. Some days, Carol couldn't get out of bed at all. Other days, she tried to act like nothing was wrong, putting on lipstick and walking Lily to school with slow, measured steps. Lily had stopped asking when she'd get better. She knew the truth, even if no one had said it out loud. "I got the medicine," Lily said quietly, reaching for the bag again. They were out of the cough drops, but the man at the counter said more should come in tomorrow. Carol nodded weakly, her eyes filled with something that looked like pride and sadness mixed together. "You're such a big girl." Lily shrugged. "I just don't want you to fall again." For a while, they sat together on the floor, neither of them speaking. The window rattled softly in the breeze, and the sound of traffic drifted up from the street below. Finally, Carol stirred. "Help me up, baby. I want to sit by the window." Lily braced herself, wrapping one arm under her mother's shoulders and the other under her knees. She wasn't strong, not really, but she used all the strength she had to help her mother onto the chair by the window. Once she was settled, Lily pulled a blanket over her and opened the curtain just a little. The view was mostly brick walls and rusted fire escapes, but the sunlight filtered through enough to warm her mother's face. Carol looked out for a while, eyes unfocused, and then turned to Lily. "You know, if something ever happens to me—" "Don't," Lily interrupted quickly, shaking her head. "You'll be okay." Carol gave her a long, searching look, then reached out and brushed a stray curl from her daughter's forehead. "You're stronger than you think, Lily. Maybe even stronger than me." The words hung in the air like something sacred, and Lily didn't know how to respond. So she didn't. She just sat beside her mother, holding her hand, the sunlight warming their faces as the afternoon turned slowly toward evening. The room was white and humming, filled with the low beeping of machines and the antiseptic chill that clung to everything like fog. Owen Blake opened his eyes slowly, his vision swimming as the overhead lights bled into vague shapes. His body felt heavy, as if he were underwater, but there was a sharp awareness beginning to return, a slow, creeping clarity that reminded him he wasn't dead. Not yet. For a long time, he didn't move. He stared at the ceiling, trying to piece together what had happened. He remembered walking down Fifth Avenue, on his way to the Paramount building for what was supposed to be a routine signing, a deal with massive financial upside but at great human cost. Layoffs, automation, streamlining. He had told himself it was just business, just numbers. That was the game. That was the world. But in the pit of his stomach, something had twisted that morning. He had felt off. Unwell. And then there was nothing. The door opened quietly, and a nurse entered, clipboard in hand. She smiled when she saw him awake. "You gave everyone quite a scare, Mr. Blake." He blinked at her, still disoriented. His voice came out hoarse. "What happened?" "You collapsed. Heart arrhythmia, likely triggered by stress, dehydration, exhaustion. We managed to stabilize you. But you were lucky. If help hadn't arrived when it did." She trailed off, but her meaning was clear. "Who called it in?" he asked slowly, struggling to push himself up against the pillows. She looked at him with a faint, almost amused smile, like she couldn't quite believe what she was about to say. "A little girl. 6 years old, according to the EMTs. Blonde, curly hair. She stayed by your side until the ambulance arrived." Owen stared at her, stunned. "A child?" "Yes." She even answered all the dispatcher's questions. Clear-headed, calm. "The paramedics said she probably saved your life." The nurse left him alone after that, and Owen lay back against the pillows, his mind suddenly full of her image. He didn't know her name, but her face hovered in his memory. A small figure kneeling beside him. Blonde curls. Brown eyes wide with concern. He hadn't imagined that. It was real. He closed his eyes again and let the memory settle. Something inside him, something buried under decades of corporate armor, began to shift. He had spent years building an empire, surrounding himself with the richest, most powerful people in the world, but when he had collapsed, literally dropped into the dirt, it wasn't a board member or lawyer or investor who saved him. It was a child. A stranger. Someone who had nothing, and yet had given him everything. 2 days later, still in recovery but already on his phone, Owen summoned his security team. He wanted every detail. Find her. That was his instruction. No excuses, no delays. At first, they were skeptical. "There's no name," his assistant said. "No footage from your side of the street. Just third-party video clips and some word of mouth from bystanders. Honestly, it's a miracle she was even spotted." "I don't care," Owen said, his voice firmer than it had been in days. "Start with the traffic cameras. Look at the pharmacy across the street. Search security footage from nearby businesses. Ask the EMTs who were first on scene. Someone knows something." They found the footage later that night, a blurry street view from a deli across the intersection. The image was grainy, but unmistakable. A little girl in a bright yellow jumpsuit kneeling beside him on the pavement. Her hair haloed in the sun, her small hand touching his shoulder. Owen stared at the screen for a long time. He had met thousands of people in his life, presidents, celebrities, kings of industry, but he couldn't stop looking at her. There was something about her stillness, her focus, that didn't match her size. She wasn't panicking. She wasn't screaming. She was helping. When his driver brought the photo printouts the next morning, Owen took them into his hands like they were something sacred. He stared at them, tracing her face with his eyes, as if trying to memorize every detail. "She can't be more than 6, the driver murmured. "Find out who she is," Owen said again, this time more quietly. "I want to meet her." He didn't know what he would say. Didn't know what he could offer. But he knew, with a strange certainty he couldn't explain, that this girl had walked into his life for a reason. Not for publicity. Not for a story. But for something deeper. Something that, for the first time in years, made him feel more like a man and less like a machine. For the rest of the day, he sat with the photo in his hand, staring at the face of a child who had saved his life and, in ways he didn't yet fully understand, was about to change it. The envelope came on a Thursday, slid through the apartment's mail slot with a soft rustle that barely drew attention. Lily was sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, coloring a picture of a house with flowers in the yard, when she heard the noise. At first, she didn't move. Mail usually meant bills, or worse, hospital notices. But something about the way it landed, heavier than usual, made her curious. She stood up, walked over, and picked it up off the floor. It was made of thick cream-colored paper, smooth to the touch and sealed with a gold-embossed emblem she didn't recognize. There was no return address, only her mother's name written in elegant handwriting. She turned it over in her hands for a moment before calling out. "Mom. You got something." From the bedroom came a soft reply, followed by the slow shuffle of slippers. Carol appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame, a pale scarf wrapped around her head. Her eyes were tired, but they lit up a little when she saw her daughter holding the envelope like a secret. "Let's open it together," she said, and they sat side by side on the couch. Carol carefully broke the seal and pulled out a folded sheet of heavy stationery. Her eyes scanned the words once, then a second time, slower. A strange expression settled on her face, part disbelief, part confusion. "What is it?" Lily asked, shifting closer. Carol handed her the paper. The handwriting was neat and firm. "Dear Ms. Garrison, I hope this letter finds you and your daughter well. I recently learned that your little girl was the one who called for help the day I collapsed on Fifth Avenue. She quite literally saved my life. Her courage and composure left an impression on every EMT and doctor who encountered her, and now, on me as well, I would be honored to invite you both to lunch this Saturday afternoon, so I may express my gratitude in person. Please don't feel any pressure, and know that my intentions are sincere, The reservation has been made under my name at the Astoria Room, noon. With respect and thanks, Owen Blake." For a long moment, the apartment was silent. Carol lowered the paper into her lap and stared at the wall across from her, like it could offer her some kind of answer. Lily tilted her head. "That's the man I helped, right? The one in the blue suit?" Carol nodded slowly. "Yes, sweetheart. That's him." "Are we going?" Carol hesitated. "He's a very powerful man, Lily. Very rich. I don't know what someone like him wants with people like us." Lily frowned. "He said thank you. That's all, right? Maybe he's just nice." Carol sighed and reached for her daughter's hand. "Nice doesn't usually come with gold envelopes and five-star restaurants." Lily squeezed her fingers. "He didn't look scary. Just sick. Maybe he just wants to say thank you, like really say it." There was something in Lily's voice that made Carol pause. That quiet certainty again. The same calm that had guided her through a medical emergency without flinching. It wasn't just maturity, it was instinct. "Okay," Carol finally said. "We'll go. But we're not letting him sweep us into some kind of fairy tale. We'll be polite, grateful, and careful." Saturday came with clear skies and a sharp breeze. Carol wore the nicest dress she owned, one she hadn't taken out of the closet in over a year. She added a soft shawl over her shoulders and applied just a touch of makeup to hide how pale she'd become. Lily wore a clean white shirt and a yellow skirt with a bow. She clutched her mother's hand the entire way into the restaurant. The Astoria Room was nothing like anything Lily had ever seen. Marble floors, chandeliers that sparkled like glass raindrops, and soft music playing from somewhere above. A man in a black suit greeted them at the door, already expecting them. He led them through the dining room to a quiet private area near the window. Owen Blake stood as they approached. He looked different than he had in the photos Carol had seen online. More tired. More human. But his eyes, icy blue and steady, softened when he looked at Lily. "You must be Lily," he said with a smile, kneeling to her level. "You saved my life." Lily smiled back, a little shy but not afraid. "You fell down. I just called the number." "That number saved me," he said. Then he stood and turned to Carol. "And you must be her mother. Thank you for coming." Carol shook his hand, unsure how to respond. She had spent years teaching Lily not to trust strangers. And now here she was, sitting across from one of the most powerful men in New York, eating roasted duck and sipping cucumber water. But the lunch wasn't what she expected. Owen didn't ask invasive questions. He didn't boast or flatter. He asked about Lily's drawings, her favorite books, what she wanted to be when she grew up. He asked Carol about her health, but not in a pitying way. He listened. And when the check came, there was no flash of superiority, no grand gesture. Just a quiet nod of thanks and an invitation to meet again sometime, if they felt comfortable. Later, as they walked home, Carol kept glancing sideways at her daughter. Lily was quiet, deep in thought. "He's not what I thought," Carol admitted at last. Lily looked up. "He's alone. I could tell." Carol didn't respond. But that night, while her daughter slept peacefully for the first time in days, she sat at the kitchen table staring at Owen Blake's handwritten letter. Not because it frightened her, or even surprised her anymore, but because something about it made her wonder, if one act of kindness could lead to all this, then maybe their story wasn't finished yet. Maybe it had only just begun. It started gradually, Carol's silences growing longer, her steps more careful, her laughter less frequent, but Lily noticed every change like cracks forming in a wall she couldn't repair. At first, Carol insisted she was just tired. Then came the dizzy spells, the sudden moments of confusion, the way she sometimes stood in the kitchen and forgot why she was there. One morning, Lily found her sitting on the bathroom floor, dazed, her lips slightly blue. That was the moment Lily knew things were getting worse, not better. Owen had continued to visit them. What began as kind gestures had turned into a quiet rhythm. He never forced his presence into their lives, but he was there, taking them to appointments, bringing groceries without being asked, showing up just to talk. He became the first adult in Lily's life who didn't look away when things got hard. Carol, at first reluctant, began to lean on him in ways she hadn't with anyone since Lily's father left years ago without a word. When the test results finally came, Carol already knew. The doctors confirmed what she had suspected for weeks, an inoperable brain tumor, aggressive and unforgiving. The specialist at Mount Sinai told her in measured, practiced tones that she might have a few months, maybe less. Carol didn't cry in the doctor's office. She just nodded, her face a mask of calm, her daughter holding her hand tightly. Lily didn't fully understand, but she understood enough. Her mother wasn't going to get better. Owen was the first person they told, not because Carol wanted to, but because she had no energy left to pretend anymore. She sat across from him in the small living room of their apartment, her shoulders hunched, hands folded in her lap like a child caught doing something wrong. "I didn't want to burden you," she said quietly. "But it's happening. I can feel it every day." He didn't speak for a long time. He just looked at her, not with pity, but something quieter, sorrow without the need for words. Finally, he leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "Whatever you need, I'll take care of it. Of you. Of her." Carol looked down, blinking quickly, her voice hoarse. "It's not just about money. You know that, right? I've seen rich men throw money at problems and walk away." Owen's reply was soft but firm. "So have I. That's not who I want to be anymore." In the weeks that followed, Carol's condition declined more quickly than anyone had expected. The days blurred together, filled with pills, whispered reassurances, and long hours of sleep. A nurse came by in the afternoons, paid for by Owen, and stayed until evening. Lily rarely left her mother's side, but Owen made sure she had moments to be a child, books, puzzles, art supplies, and time to just breathe. One evening, Carol asked Owen to stay after Lily had gone to bed. She was lying on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, her eyes dim but sharp with intention. He sat quietly beside her, waiting. "She'll be alone soon," Carol said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her fingers. "She's strong, but she's still just a child. She needs someone." "She has you," Owen said, even though he knew where this was going. "Not for much longer." Carol turned her head and looked at him. "I'm not asking for charity. Or for you to feel guilty because she saved you. I'm asking because I've watched you. And I believe you're good." He didn't answer right away. His throat felt tight, and when he finally spoke, it came out low and sure. "I love her. I didn't expect to. But I do. I look at her, and I see a better version of me. A version I never became." Carol's eyes filled, and she smiled faintly. "Then promise me something. Promise me that if I don't make it, you won't let her go. Not to the system. Not to strangers. Promise you'll stay." "I swear," he said, and she reached out to squeeze his hand. The room was quiet after that. The city hummed outside their window, cars, sirens, the occasional laugh from a bar down the street, but inside the apartment, it felt like time had stopped, suspended between heartbreak and hope. For the first time in years, Carol allowed herself to sleep deeply that night, knowing that someone would be there when she no longer could be. And in the next room, Lily lay awake in bed, her small hands clutched around the corner of her pillow, listening to the silence, her heart already beginning to understand that goodbye was getting closer. Carol passed away on a rainy morning in early spring. The sky outside the window was a heavy shade of gray, the kind that blurred the city skyline into a single smeared silhouette. Lily sat beside her mother's bed, her hand resting on the thin fingers that had once braided her hair, wiped her tears, helped her learn to write her name. The apartment was silent except for the slow rhythm of rain against the window and the soft beeping of the heart monitor that had grown quieter by the hour. When the final breath left Carol's body, it did so with the gentleness of someone slipping into sleep. There was no panic. No fear. Just a silence that felt so deep it seemed to echo. The nurse called Owen, and he arrived within 20 minutes, still wearing the black coat he had thrown on as he rushed out the door. When he stepped into the room and saw Lily sitting there, her small body stiff and unmoving, he knew he would never forget that image for the rest of his life. She didn't cry. She didn't even blink. She just sat holding her mother's hand, as if letting go would break something too important to repair. He walked over, knelt beside her, and placed his hand gently on her shoulder. "Lily," he said softly. "I'm here." She looked up at him, and her eyes, those same warm brown eyes that had once stared down death without blinking, were hollow. "She's gone." "I know," he whispered. They stayed like that for a long time, crouched beside the bed, surrounded by the quiet stillness of loss. The funeral was small, held in a modest chapel Owen arranged through one of his private contacts. There were no headlines, no reporters. He had made sure of that. It wasn't a media moment. It was a goodbye. Carol had no family left, no siblings, no parents. Just Lily, and now, somehow, him. The only guests were the nurse who had cared for Carol, a woman from their building who had helped bring groceries, and two of Owen's staff members who remained discreetly in the back row. Lily stood at the front in a simple black dress, clutching a white rose. She didn't speak during the service. She didn't need to. Her silence was louder than any eulogy. After the burial, Owen took Lily home. Not to the small apartment they'd shared before, but to a quiet, sunlit penthouse in Midtown that he had already prepared with her in mind. The guest room had been transformed into something soft and warm, with bookshelves, watercolor paintings, and a window seat with cushions. It wasn't meant to replace her mother. Nothing could. But it was a space to begin again. The legal process of becoming Lily's guardian was surprisingly fast, helped along by Carol's signed documents, her last wishes carefully prepared with Owen's lawyers weeks before her death. Lily didn't argue. She simply went where she was taken, her trust in Owen absolute, as if the promise he had made to her mother was now carved in stone. The media caught wind of it eventually. Billionaire tech magnate Owen Blake takes in child from dying single mother, headlines spun stories with 1,000 different angles. Some called it charity. Others suggested guilt. A few accused him of trying to reshape his image. But Owen didn't offer explanations. He refused interviews. He let people say what they wanted while he focused on what truly mattered, Lily. At first, she didn't talk much. She moved through her days with the quiet efficiency of someone twice her age. She dressed herself, made her bed, sat through her therapy sessions without complaint. At night, Owen would sometimes find her curled up on the window seat, staring out at the city, her sketchpad resting on her lap. One evening, he sat beside her in silence, waiting. After a while, she handed him the drawing. It was of her mother, smiling, eyes bright, sitting in the very chair where she had watched the sun set from their old apartment window. She used to say the sun looked different every evening, Lily said quietly. Like it was trying to paint a new picture each day, so we wouldn't give up. Owen looked down at the drawing for a long time. He could see how much of Carol lived in Lily, in the way she saw the world, in the way she held on even when it hurt. She was right, he said. And you're a part of that picture now. Lily nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving the skyline. She told me to be brave. You were, he said. You still are. And for the first time in weeks, Lily leaned against his side, not saying anything more, just resting there. Owen wrapped his arm around her shoulders, feeling the weight of her grief and her strength all at once. He had built empires. Closed deals that shaped industries. But nothing had ever felt as meaningful as keeping that quiet promise, to never leave her. To become not a savior, but a home. A year passed quietly, marked not by headlines or boardroom victories, but by smaller moments, school lunches packed in the morning, forgotten art projects drying on the kitchen table, late-night talks whispered under the soft glow of a bedside lamp. Lily had begun to settle into her new life, though the loss of her mother lingered in the air like a familiar scent. It clung to her in the way she folded her clothes just so, or the way she still checked behind the bedroom door every night, as if expecting Carol to step through it. Owen never rushed her grief. He didn't fill the silence with promises he couldn't keep or distractions that would only fade. Instead, he gave her space, and over time, she slowly began to let him in. One chilly evening in early winter, they sat by the fireplace in Owen's apartment. A storm had rolled in over the city, filling the windows with streaks of rain and distant thunder. Lily sat curled in a blanket, her sketchbook open on her lap. Owen sat across from her, a book in hand he hadn't turned a page of in nearly 20 minutes. The silence between them was easy now, but there was something unfinished lingering just beneath the surface. Lily looked up suddenly, her voice quiet but certain. Can I ask you something? Of course, Owen said, setting the book aside. That day, when you collapsed. Why did it happen? You never told me. Owen leaned back slightly, caught off guard by the directness of the question. He had rehearsed the answer in his head many times but had never spoken it out loud, not even to his closest advisors. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. Then he nodded, slowly. I think it's time you knew. He stood, walked to the cabinet near the fireplace, and pulled out a folder. Inside were documents, charts, and pages covered in numbers and names. He brought it to her and placed it gently on the table. I was on my way to sign a deal, he began, his voice low. It would have added billions to the company's value. On paper, it looked brilliant: cost-cutting, automation, efficiency. But it came at a price. Thousands of people would have lost their jobs. People who had families, mortgages, children in school. Lily looked down at the papers but didn't touch them. Her eyes were on him, watching. "I knew it was wrong," he continued. "Not illegal. Not even controversial. Just wrong. I told myself it was part of business, that someone else would do it if I didn't. But that morning, as I walked to the meeting, something inside me felt off. My heart was racing. My chest felt tight. And then, nothing." Lily nodded slowly. "That's when I found you." He smiled faintly. "Yes. And in that moment, everything I thought I cared about vanished. The money. The meeting. The image. All of it was gone. And there you were, 6 years old, helping a stranger. No cameras. No one telling you to do it. You just acted." There was a long pause as he sat back down across from her. "I canceled the deal," he said. "That same day. People thought I was insane. The board fought me. Investors pulled out. I lost friends, partners. But I also found something I didn't know I was missing: clarity." Lily tilted her head. "Clarity?" "That I didn't want to live in a world where doing the right thing was considered weakness. That maybe the point of having power wasn't to protect it, but to use it. To fix what I'd helped break." She looked down at her sketchbook and quietly began to draw again, her pencil sweeping across the page with thoughtful strokes. "You changed the company?" she asked after a few minutes. "Yes," he said. "We started investing in people instead of replacing them. We opened community programs, built homes, funded schools and clinics in places where we'd once only extracted value. Some investors left. Others came back. But it wasn't about that anymore." Lily paused her drawing and looked up. "Why are you telling me this now?" Owen smiled softly. "Because you deserve to know the truth. You didn't just save my life that day. You changed the course of it. And I want you to understand that even the smallest act of courage, like what you did, can ripple out in ways you may never see." She stared at him for a moment, then nodded, quietly taking it all in. She didn't need to say anything. Her silence was her answer. Later that night, after she had gone to bed, Owen stood by her doorway for a while, watching her sleep. The storm had passed, leaving behind a stillness that felt like peace. In that quiet, he realized how far they had both come, two strangers from different worlds, brought together by a single moment neither could have predicted. He turned off the light and walked away, knowing that the truth had finally been spoken, and that somehow, in telling it, he had begun to forgive himself. 10 years later, the summer air in Cambridge was warm and filled with the sound of birds, bikes rolling over cobblestone paths, and the occasional distant laughter of students celebrating their final exams. On the campus of Harvard University, the courtyard had been transformed into a sea of caps and gowns, chairs perfectly lined up beneath a white canopy that fluttered gently in the breeze. Owen sat near the front, surrounded by proud families and faculty, dressed in a dark suit, his hands resting tightly in his lap. His face, though more lined than it had been a decade ago, held an expression of deep and quiet pride. His eyes didn't scan the crowd or wander. They were fixed only on one place, the stage, where Lily would soon walk. She had grown into a young woman with the same steady eyes and calm presence she had as a child, but now her steps carried a quiet authority, her voice had a confident tone, and the world seemed to bend just slightly around her as she moved. She wore a crimson gown and a matching cap, her hair falling in loose waves beneath it. In her hand, she held the speech she had written the night before, short, deliberate, and filled with honesty. When her name was called, she walked across the stage with grace, pausing as the dean handed her the diploma and whispered congratulations. The applause was loud, but Owen barely heard it. All he saw was the little girl in the yellow jumpsuit kneeling on a Manhattan sidewalk, and the woman that girl had become. After the ceremony, the courtyard filled with hugs and camera flashes, the energy of hundreds of futures beginning all at once. Lily found Owen standing beside one of the stone pillars near the edge of the crowd, a proud but distant look on his face, as if he still didn't quite believe this moment was real. She walked up to him and wrapped her arms around him in a long, tight embrace. He closed his eyes, returning it with all the strength he had. "You did it," he said quietly, his voice thick. "We did it," she replied, smiling. They sat later that afternoon on a quiet bench near the Charles River, away from the noise and ceremony. The water sparkled beneath the sunlight, and the city stretched in the distance, full of noise and life and stories waiting to be told. "I never thought I'd come this far," she said, her voice almost lost in the breeze. "You didn't just come this far," Owen said. "You built a path no one else could have built. You carried the weight of grief, of change, and you turned it into something that helps others. That takes strength." Lily looked out at the river. "Sometimes I think about that day, when I found you on the ground. If I had just walked past, or been a few minutes late." "You didn't walk past," Owen said, shaking his head. "You never would have. That's the difference." "I didn't save your life," she said after a pause. "Not really. You chose to change. You saved your own." "No," he said with a quiet certainty. "You gave me a reason to." She glanced at him, studying his face as she had when she was younger, searching for the truth beneath his words. He wasn't the man the world had once feared and admired from afar. He was someone different now, quieter, more thoughtful, and no longer defined by numbers and profits. He had stepped out of the empire he had built and into something far more meaningful: fatherhood, healing, and humility. "I still miss her," Lily said suddenly. "Even after all this time." Owen nodded. "I do too." "She would have been proud of you," Lily added. "She would have been proud of us." They sat in silence after that, not because there was nothing left to say, but because sometimes silence is the only language that fits the moment. The wind moved softly through the trees, and the water of the river continued its quiet path forward, just like life. As the sun began to lower in the sky, Lily turned to Owen and smiled, not a smile of celebration, but of peace, the kind that comes after years of walking through darkness and finally reaching the light. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, slightly yellowed at the edges. He handed it to her. She opened it slowly, recognizing the handwriting immediately. It was the letter Carol had written just days before she passed, the one Owen had kept all these years. It read simply, "Asterisk, if she becomes half the woman I believe she will, then I know she'll change the world. And if you help her get there, I'll never stop being grateful, asterisk." Lily folded it carefully and pressed it against her chest. "I'm going to try," she said softly. "You already have," Owen replied. And in that moment, beneath the sky that had watched them both rise and fall and rise again, they sat side by side, not as a billionaire and a little girl who once knelt on a sidewalk, but as family. Two lives, broken and rebuilt, forever changed by a single, ordinary act of extraordinary kindness.